So what will the learner be in 2035? A typical learner may be using Mind Clock to remind her of upcoming events, use help from a holographic advisor bot. You know what those are, that your teacher is sitting in Kuala Lumpur, but you can have the 3-dimensional holographic figure right here, projected in front of you. It almost seems as if the teacher is in the room. So that will become quite common, that advisor bot for critical thinking and design to plan for an assignment. The learner will use advanced communication tools to learn from multiple language materials, because translation, online translation will become so perfect. Right now we are only learning in our own language or in English, but then you can learn from German, you can learn from Russian, you can learn wherever the relevant data is. It will be quickly translated and you can learn from multiple language materials. Take several micro classes simultaneously, learn from home without attending physical lectures, using tools that provide a virtual experience of real-time events, and use teaching bots to prepare for assessments and exams. In fact, already children are buying this, what's that called, Oculus Go, because the price has crashed from $600 to $200, and you can use it and you can watch, 3-dimensional, you can play games, you can watch Netflix, everything on that visor without having access to a computer. So these things are happening right away. All activities will involve using technologies of the future, and some of these have not yet been invented. Now, the global community adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of which Sustainable Development Goal 4 is dedicated to education and aspires to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning for all by 2030. The higher education community cannot remain aloof from such national and global goals. In short, we need to prepare an ecosystem that promotes lifelong learning for all. Higher education systems need to embrace lifelong learning and strengthen their outreach function, or what we used to call continuing education extension, to open up education to wider constituencies, especially the unreached. Lifelong learning, as you know, includes the whole spectrum of formal, non-formal, and informal learning, and simply reforming current education systems will not be enough. Countries will need to continually skill and reskill their workforce throughout their life. Now, changing 4 jobs by the time you are 32 is the new normal for the millennials, anybody who's born after 1985. That's all of you, except some of us. So it would be imperative to prepare them to be employable. This is the other thing, universities never bothered about the employability dimension. We gave good foundations and people did their own stuff. This will require a balance between theory and practice, a focus on hard as well as soft skills, a curriculum that addresses the needs of industry and society. The orientation will change also to providing certification based not on the number of hours study or the years put in, but on the competence achieved. So many changes are coming. They're on the horizon already. So to create an education system that is responsive to the market needs and future requirements, it's necessary to look at the different stages of the employability pathway, right from before admission when you sensitize the learner, to after induction when you do career counseling, ask them what they want to do and lead them, to those paths. Penultimate year when you do the evaluation drills, and finally career support upon graduation, and also possibly tracing where our learners are going. So if we need to do this, we'll have to reimagine our policies and practices going forward. So let us conclude. I've said so many things, I don't know what you'll remember, but please remember the 3 E's. I think this is what we need to remember when we are dealing with all these unknowns and uncertainties ahead of us. As robots take up cognitive tasks which they can perform much better than human beings, what human beings can bring to the table is empathy, the ability to relate to other people. This is a skill which can be learned. We haven't been teaching it yet, but how can we incorporate this and teach this to our learners so that they are much more conscious of this particular skill? The second point, the costs and location of the emerging technologies, as I said, is located mostly in global urban centers, but it disadvantages people in remote areas. What policies and practices do we need to put in place to ensure that we don't widen the existing digital divide? How do we ensure equity? And that one solution to that is that you develop the policies for them first, the remote ones. And those policies will then also cater to people in urban centers, because they'll be so, ideologically sound that they'll also benefit them. The third is, which we've already spoken about, ethics. Will these technologies be like the monster Frankenstein, or will they bring peace and harmony in the world? I think the answer will depend upon our decisions. With that, let me thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Prof. Asha. May I invite Prof. Zoraini to come up on stage to conduct the Q&A session. Prof. Asha, could you take your seat on the stage? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prakash. Okay, good afternoon, and thank you, Prof. Asha, for a very insightful presentation. May I invite members of the audience to ask questions? Yes, please.
My name is Abdullah Ubadomu. I'm from Nigeria. I'm the Vice Chancellor of the National Open University of Nigeria. I'm very fascinated with the idea of artificial intelligence. And what really it means is that the teacher is dead. Because with a robot and all the artificial programming, I don't need a human teacher. And Luddites in Manchester came up with this idea of being resistant to technology. And yet here we are, despite their resistance. So my question is, for traditional societies in Africa that rely heavily on a human contact, what will be the consequences of wide-scale adoption of artificial intelligence? Because there is a lot of suspicion of technology as it is now in our societies. But we believe that for a person to learn effectively, he has to have a human teacher. A teacher has to take him through. But I quite agree with you. This is the way to go. We are dealing with artificial intelligence, but that means that we are killing the teacher. Because if the teacher is dead, then we don't need to worry about who is responsible for students' failures. We don't have to worry about children being intimidated by their curriculum, because the teacher in front of them is not a human teacher. It's an unfeeling machine. It doesn't care whether you understand or you don't. It has no feeling. It has nothing. And we would like to know that if a child comes to the classroom hungry, that the teacher will understand that the child is not paying attention because he's hungry. There is that humanity. But with the death of the teacher, what happens to our humanity? Which I think you posed the question at the end. about the ethics. But ethics is about right and wrong. We're talking about what is feasible and what is not feasible in terms of traditional societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, Prof. Asha.
Prof, I don't think I said that the teacher is dead. I was only citing what somebody had said, that the teacher's role will change. All the research so far says that it's not the class size, it's not the resources in the building and that you provide in schools. It's not the kind of uniforms and books you are giving to the students that that have a positive impact on learning outcomes. It's the teacher. And I think in all the institutions, whether students are doing well, whether it's Finland, Singapore, and South Korea, the governments are investing very heavily in teacher education for precisely that reason. So I think the teacher is alive, well, and kicking. Not the students, I hope. But so I don't think the teachers are going anywhere. You remember these predictions? Some years ago, they said the university will be dead by 2025. Technology will take over. The universities are thriving. In fact, more universities are coming up than ever before. The only thing is that the role keeps changing. And regarding the use of technology, right now we are in traditional societies. But even in those traditional societies, our people in the remote forests of Uganda are walking around with mobile phones. They're connected with the world. They're learning through those mobile phones. So I don't think technology, the advent of technology cannot be stopped. It will come. The only thing is that how do we deal with it without disadvantaging people? And I'm sorry if teachers, I kill the teacher. I don't mean to, because teachers are very important and we are doing a lot of teacher training around the Commonwealth.
Okay. Any questions? Any more questions? Yes, please. What's it called? It's not on. It's not on. Use this.
So, I'm Viraj from Open University of Mauritius, the Director General. Thank you for the excellent presentation. My question is about employability. Who is deciding who will be employable? At a certain point in time, employers are saying, the Vice Chancellor of University of Mauritius is here. Let's do mechatronics, I remember. Today, people are saying, well, we don't want to hire mechatronics engineers because they're neither good in mechanical nor in electronics. Some of the banks prefer to hire engineers rather than people from finance. So, who is deciding on this earth who is employable? Because this is making the life of universities, of vice chancellors, of DGs very difficult. Because we would like to know who decides on employability. Should we be doing more of the same thing, either do the soft skills that you said, or doing little of everything? That's my question. Thank you.
Google, when they employ people, and they are a very big employer, they're not going by the degrees that people have. They are going by certain competencies which they require. So ultimately, who decides who is employable is the market and the industry. They will determine. And what is happening is that, we have to keep pace with what is the requirement of the market so that we can train our people in that. Like somebody had said that, Rip Van Winkle, he went to sleep in 1912. And when he woke up in 2012 and looked around him, he found, oh, the world has changed, I don't know where to go. So where did they send him to? A school, because that's the only place which had not changed in all those years. So he says, oh, I feel comfortable here because this I recognize what's going on, you know, the class, shock and everything. So what we need to do is, I think the education sector has been slow to make the changes which they need. And that's why the private provision has come in a big way. In some countries, you know, it's 80% private provision which is actually catering to the need for higher education. Why? Because the public institutions have not been able to keep pace with that. And if we don't do it, somebody else will do. You know, there's never a vacuum in nature. If I can't do it, somebody else will do it and do it even better. So that's the actual thing for institutions, to be very mindful and to always have this kind of close linkage with the market to see where exactly it's happening. What often happens in our institutions is, if I'm an expert in literature, I'll say, well, I think we should do this course. You know, we are very supply driven, we are not demand driven. And I think I can sum it up in just this, that let's be demand rather than supply driven, and I think we'll get it right.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned something about demand driven, or letting the market determine what we do at the universities, and yet we are slow to change. Yet some universities may be doing the right thing, and but unfortunately most of the universities are very, very slow to change, and thus not meeting the market demands. Do you see this trend changing in the next 5 years?
They don't have a choice actually, because if you don't do it, somebody else will. Now, some of the research universities like MIT, etc., have seen the writing on the wall and they're changing. For example, you can do, a few MOOCs, take a proctored exam, and then you get exemption for one full semester for a regular fee-paying MIT program at master's level. So, you know, they're already doing micro-credentialing, they're already doing, use of blockchain. They're already trying to show how people can actually be attracted to the institution. So, open universities need to do that, you know, because these are things which we should have done. Those are done by research institutions like running MOOCs, etc. Something which open universities would have done with great finesse and expertise, because they are experts in all that. Pedagogy, how to deliver courses, etc. But we are just, I don't know, watching the world go by and not taking advantage of these things. OER are there, we are still having course team meetings, we are still developing, you know, courses from scratch when we can actually take things. There again, you know, some universities have changed. In Athabasca, when a faculty member says, I want to develop a course, the PVC says, show me the evidence that this topic is not already available as OER. Make me the proposal and give me the guarantee that this topic, only then we'll develop a new course, otherwise use the OER from the web. So people are making use of it, but whether the mass of institutions will change in the next 5 years, it seems highly unlikely at this point.
So it's not reinventing the wheel, but at the same time, there's something that I heard called the unbundled curriculum. Is it something that you can comment on?
See, unbundling is allowing people more choices. This is something which open universities know well about. The only thing is that in the process we started out very openly, but because of convenience and operational difficulties, we became gradually more closed. I think we just have to be open. And the principles of, the founding fathers of open universities, if we follow those, I think we are on a good track. Open as to people, open as to places, open as to methods, and open as to ideas. I think those still resonate as actually general principles for all of us.
Flexibility. Yeah. Okay, any more questions from the audience? Yes, please. Dr. Dennis. Coming behind you.
Professor Kanwar, thank you so much also. I'll add my voice to the thanks which have gone before for a very insightful and intriguing review of the evolving developments in higher education. My question is very simple. How do you think higher education systems can best prepare themselves to deal with market failures in terms of the kinds of employability which will emerge as artificial intelligence plays a greater and greater role in determining what is available for human beings and how empathy can be engineered into such a system?
Thank you for that. I think one of the things, because some of the jobs and the possibilities of employability have not yet even emerged. And yet our young people will be dealing with those situations. So how can we prepare them? How do we make them problem solvers, creative thinkers, and people who can work with others, and people who persevere? I think there are two things. If I was to, think, what is it that I would like my student to leave me with? Never mind the book knowledge, never mind everything else, but the two P's actually. One is passion, and the other is perseverance. I think if you can instill those two qualities in the students, I think they can take on the world. You can give them anything, any challenge, and they'll actually surmount it. So I think that would be the short answer.
Okay, maybe I think just one more question, yeah, from the top. Any mic? Mic, okay, there's a mic at the podium. Or mic? Coming.
I'm Edmund. I was a former chemist. I'm a practicing lawyer now. I was a social worker doing research for NGOs. My concern is I noticed that almost every faculty of life, whether you talk about medicine or law, they all become so commercialized. I think we have lost our human value somehow or other somewhere. And the only salvation appeared to be education. But when I hear today's talk, I also see education is so commercialized as well. We speak of students who will have employability, commercial. We want them to go to factories and work. We are not telling them to go back to society and lift up the masses, the people. I think majority of the world are actually suffering, that poverty is very high. And all the talk about digital technology and advancement is a farce. I'm sorry to be crude, but isn't there a way that education can relook at itself and ask, what is the purpose of education? Why are we educating ourselves? Why do we need knowledge and awareness? Is it just to fill our pockets as everybody else are doing? And now we are all in competition as to who has more money, not who has better empathy, sympathy. That's one. And along those lines, I think the education system, like many other faculties, are too westernized. I think we are not adopting Eastern values. We are not looking at people like Gandhi, who were very great philosophers, and I think that it's a lot we can learn from Eastern values. Will education look into all these things? And because I think education will ultimately be the engine for our lives. So if we get the wrong education, we all end up being wrong persons. That's my comment, really. I'm not sure whether it forms a question. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very important. That's a very important comment, because values are absolutely fundamental to anything to do with education. And those are the values which will actually, like you mentioned Gandhi, what he talked about was compassion. And that's what empathy is about, you know, to be able to understand other people. And ethics, to be able to choose right from wrong. Education teaches us that from the very early stages, that this is right, this is wrong. Those are things which we have to learn and which we have to actually teach to our own students going forward. So I agree with everything that you say. We have become very commercialized. Everything is, you know, judged by how much money people have or what status people have. When we were growing up, our parents used to say that, you know, even the dacoits have money. What you should have is character. You know, that was the kind of orientation of the way children were being brought up at home. Now it's not that. How can you get into this institution? How can you get that more money? So I think education somewhere probably lost its root, and if we are talking about it now, it's a good sign, because values is absolutely central to education, and we mustn't forget those.
Yeah, I just, something occurred to my mind. I think we now have what is called social business or social enterprise. So could that be a marriage between doing something good for society, but at the same time allowing the person involved in the social business to survive?
Yes, I mean, there are social enterprise models which people have, you know, which combine profits with, you know, societal good. And if you look at the world, you know, I mean, it's not all doom and gloom, because if you look at the world from, you know, 30 or 40 years ago, if you look at people's health, they are living longer. If you're looking at literacy and education, there are more people who are educated and literate today than they were before. There is less child mortality than there was even 10 years ago. So I think things are moving in the right track. And the fact that, you know, the global community has adopted sustainable development goals, countries are helping each other along. And what they are saying now is that by 2030, poverty will be eradicated completely. When we talked about the Millennium Development Goals in 2000, we said we would halve poverty by 2015. Now we are talking about complete eradication, and China has done a lot to bring people, lift people out of poverty, so the numbers have gone down. So I think the world is moving in the right direction. It's not as if, you know, we are going over the top. There are many kind of solid achievements.
Okay, thank you. I wonder if we want to take one more question. Yeah, please.
Okay, sorry about it. Okay, so Prof, so I'm looking at the three areas just now that you mentioned. The one area of it is the data, okay? Empathy, data, and technologies. So data, where you have mentioned that big data nowadays actually play a big role, that we are trying to learn how our students learn, and we try to make it better. But when you look at the way we track the student learning in the process of learning, so there are issues such as privacy, okay? And these actually come back to the issue on data governance. So I just wonder, are there any work in COL or even worldwide that are talking about the data governance in this arena? Thank you.
You know, we've just seen how easy it is to sell data now, because everybody's looking for data, you know, to feed the machine learning. But there are also, I think, regulations which are coming up. The European Union has come up with the GDPR regulation just recently. And even in Canada, you know, you can't send the call newsletter to everyone unless you've sought their permission first. So in many countries, there are very stringent laws about, you know, who you can approach and whose privacy you can encroach upon, even unwittingly. So people are taking cognizance of that, and I think that's a good sign.
All right, I think because of conditions out there, we probably should end here right now. And before we conclude, maybe can I pass it back to Mr. Prakash? Thank you so much for being a great audience.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. The wonder of modern technology. Prof. Asha was actually chairing a day-long meeting yesterday, another meeting this morning, and yet her enthusiasm in sharing her views and experiences was not affected at all this afternoon. For that, she deserves a round of applause. In appreciation of Prof. Asha's presence here, let me invite Prof. Zoraini to present a token of appreciation to Prof. Asha.